Okay, good evening. Um, in Parshas Lech Lecha, towards the end, by the Bris ben Besarim, Avram Avinu says to Kosh Baruch Hu, famous words, "Bama Eda," right? Ki Yeshua Haaretz. How do I know that I will inherit the land? That was a big deal. He left Haran. He had been in Ur Kasdim. He had to leave there because Nimrod tried to kill him. Then they went to Haran, and then Hashem said Lech Lecha, and he went there to Israel, and that was going to be his Yerusha. That was going to be the place, his homeland, and that of his children. And it was tricky. Empires are constantly conquering, and everything's based upon schuyot, merits. And he wanted a guarantee from Akash Baruch Hu, not so much for himself, but for his descendants. And so Kodesh Baruch Hu says, okay, go ahead. We're gonna answer that question, but it's not going to be a one-line answer, but instead that you're going to have to do a whole process over here called the Bris Ben Besarim, and basically it starts out by saying. V'imar lav kachlecha egla mishuleshes, take a 3-year-old calf, the A's mishuleshes, also 3-year-old goat, the ayil mishulash, right? V'sarva v'gozo. V'yikach lo eskol Ela, right? By Veseo Sam, but Tavech, and he cut everything up into pieces, and that was the whole process of passing through. In those days, you made a covenant. It was like you had to pass through something, just like crossing through the Yam Suf, made another covenant with Hashem. That was part of the process. It made it official, and also had spiritual impacts as well. The bird he didn't cut, right? And then Hashem launches into the whole. What's going to happen? V'yomar Lavram Yadoa Teda. You should know with certainty. Ger hi sorry ger ki geri hi zaracha, right? Be'eretz lo lehem v'vadum v'inu osam arba miyoshana, right? That your seed, your children, your descendants will go to a place that's not their land. There'll be strangers there. They'll serve, and they'll be made to suffer. They'll be what's the word? They're oppressed, right? And this will take place for 400 years, although it wasn't always the whole 400 years, as Rashi points out. A couple of places that how the cheshbon worked, and then Hashem says, but it will end happily after all that, right? For those who survive it. V'games goy asher yavodu dan anochi v'acharei chen yetzu b'rechush gadol, and I will judge the nation that has done this to you. Egypt was not yet named, which is why the Rambam says that's why they were punished, because it didn't have to be the nation to do it. Some nation was going to do it. Question of which one. Egypt was the most appropriate one, and as a result of that, they were punished for having become that nation that can carry out that part of Hashem's plan. So everybody asks questions. I mean, this is a difficult passage. It's a very difficult thing to have to understand and explain, because it seems like a relatively simple question. Abraham didn't doubt God. I mean, this is already way into, well, actually not way, it's towards the beginning, but he did survive. Or Kasti went to the fiery furnace, trusting in Hashem. Not that he expected a miracle, but he believed it was all for the good. And he didn't change his faith, and Hashem said Lech Lecha, and he followed him to a strange land, and left behind his family. Even the first time he came back to get his father later on, but in the beginning he came by himself on a pilot trip when he was much younger. The Medrash talks about this. It's not obvious from the verses, but that's what the Medrash explains. And so he's definitely trusting Hashem. Avram is not lacking in bitachon and Amunah, that's for sure. So if he says "B'ma Eda," it's not because he's saying Hashem, I doubt you. It's not going to come to the Gemara. The Gemara says that in Megillah, that Avram was concerned because he knew that his children was not that Hashem would go back on his word, but that his descendants, they wouldn't live up to the standard. It's a long time. We're not talking about a year, 2 years, 5 years. I mean, people go from good to bad, and from bad to good. Things change over time. That's what it says. Hashem doesn't trust his kadoshim because they can change over time. So we're talking about hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. In the course of thousands of years, there could be a whole generation, and maybe he saw a prophecy that will go off the derech, big time. I mean, you look at Hosea, you look at all Abraham's concerns were real. Because if you look at all these prophecies, the Nevuahs, the Sforim, Yeshaya and Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel, you look at what's going on. Hosea is just only 14 short chapters, but basically 13 of those chapters are about the terrible, anti-Torah lifestyle of that generation, which begs the question, based on this week's parsha, how could you even do that? Because the Torah is very specific about what's going to happen if you go astray, if you don't live by Torah mitzvahs. And they believed it. They knew that God, there was no doubt that the Torah came from God, and there was no doubt that God was in Shemayim. That was not the issue. And they had Nevi'im, prophets, to tell them that this is that. This is what you're doing is going to lead to that destruction because you're now doing what the Torah is. How do you get to a point like that? That's today not an issue. Today, it's easy to understand, even for frum people. It's easy to understand. But the truth is that the frum world, for the most part, we have our shortcomings, we make our mistakes, and we have our yetzer haras, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, there's very few, if any, frum Jews who worship idols. There's very few frum Jews, authentic, from people living by Torah mitzvahs, who are guilty of Gilui Arayos and the level they were doing. There are very few frum Jews who are guilty of murder, as they were back at that time. And we don't have prophets today, not the kind we're talking about in the Chumash or and the Nevi'im, right? We're talking about a whole different level of reality today, thousands of years in the future, away from Har Sinai and away from prophecy. It's amazing. I mean, it's really, when you think about it, it's really quite amazing that anyone's still here, living by Torah mitzvahs. But we're doing a relatively good job considering how many thousands of years have passed, and we don't have prophets to tell us what to do and to warn us what's going on and what Hashem is thinking. So how much more so back then should they have been able to withstand the temptation to go astray and set themselves up? I mean, that's what Eicha basically asked. That's the question that Eicha is dealing with. How? How did you get to this point? How is it possible? If Hashem hadn't warned you about that, then maybe you could have an excuse. We didn't know. We didn't realize it could get so extreme, but he did warn you. And then Moshe repeated it in Parshas Kisavo in explicit detail and doubled the amount of curses. So, that's what Eicha is. How'd you miss it? How did you get it's such a big thing. How did you miss it? And Abraham, he's worried about that. So Hashem says to him, the Gemara says, that there'll be a Beis Hamikdash. You'll be able to bring karbanos. You'll be able to atone, right? You'll do the korban tamid itself. Aside from the korban chatos, a person brings on a personal or an asham talui. These different karbanos that we had to mechaper for a various the person did nationally. Every day we brought a korban tamid, one in the morning to mechaper for any of theirs done nationally. The night before, and ben arbaim the afternoon for the ones that were done during the day. So we had coverage. We had spiritual health insurance 24/7 because of the korban tamid. That was the problem. That according to the Lashon explains, and others as well, that they relied upon that. They thought that because they had, in fact, to show you how powerful the korban tamid actually was. We know that after the great Hanukkah miracle and things began to fall apart once again and resulting in civil war between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, that the ones outside the Beis Hamikdash used to first of all inside they tried to, even though they were fighting from inside. There was a siege around the Beis Hamikdash and they're inside Yerushalayim and the ones outside are fighting from the outside. There's civil war is going on, but they agreed to keep the korban tamid going. So they would lower money, very bizarre. They would lower money from inside, and every day the other side would allow a korban tamid to be a lamb or a sheep to be raised up for the service because they couldn't get them inside. They ran out. So the Gemara says somebody versed in Greek someone versed in Greek wisdom. Yavanis, they said that as long as we're doing this, as long as we're going to supply them with the korban tamid, this continual offering, this war is going to go on forever. Somehow it's like we're not going to be able to end this thing. So therefore, they decided that the next day, rather than put a sheep into the basket, they would put a chazer into the basket. The Gemara says that on the way up, it stuck its hooves into the walls of the, the shepech of the base of Mikdash, and the ground shook for 400 square miles, and that was the beginning of the end. After that, the Romans came, and and the fourth and final exile followed, because of this, and that changed, and that was it. That was the end of the civil war. So why did it keep going? Because of the Korban Tamid, even though they're doing terrible averos, having a civil war, nonetheless, that the Korban Tamid had the power to mechaper for this averos, and it was just going on and on. So people thought the same thing as well, and they were right. By the way, they were right. As long as they were doing the Korban Tamid sincerely, it was in fact being atoning daily, 24 hours a day for all their averos. But the moment that they said, "Well, that's why we can't sin," that's what we can afford to sin, because if I sin tonight, then tomorrow morning the Korban Tamid will fix it up. Now, if I sin tomorrow during the day, then the one better buying will fix it up. But Hashem says, no, it doesn't work that way. The same way that the Gemara says, and the Rambam brings down as well, anybody who does an Avera saying that I'll do this Avera because Yom Kippur will mechaper for me, 5 minutes before Yom Kippur, he does an Avera thinking that I'll go to Yom Kippur and that'll clear the slate and I'll be clean once again. So Hashem says, no, I didn't give you the opportunity of Yom Kippur or the Korban Tamid to use as an excuse to sin. I used it as a means to clean up the mistakes that you made, but because you were trying the best to do the right thing, and you happen to fall short. So this is a way to fix it up. But if you're going to use this as the basis for the Avera itself, forget it, doesn't work. So once that was the case, and the Korban Tamid no longer worked, and now the Averas began to accumulate. And they didn't realize this. They didn't understand this at first, and maybe they didn't want to pay attention to it, like everyone. Someone warns you, don't do that because that's going to happen, and you don't want to deal with it. So you take the risk. And they thought, cognitive dissonance, and maybe that would save them. And of course, in the end, it didn't. And they woke up and they realized, boy, did we make a mistake. When it finally came down to being exiled and tortured and all these things that happened at the beginning of Galus Bavel. But Avram Avinu says to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, but that's just Zman Beis Hamikdash. If the Beis Hamikdash ends up being destroyed because they lose that, then they can't bring the Korban Tamid. They can't bring the Karbanos anymore. So then what will secure the land for them? And then Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, well, then they can say their Karbanos sincerely, of course. Again, not for this to try to justify an Avera, but you slipped up, you made a mistake, and you didn't want to, you had a weak moment, but you realize it's the wrong thing, and now you're relying upon the saying of the Karbanos, which just goes to show you how powerful it is. The Gemara, the last stuff of Menachos, says exactly this, that we learn out from Psukim that the actual saying of it has the power to affect the spheres in the world that you're living in, and your din by saying it. So, people, should I say these things? Should I shouldn't say these things? And just rattle them up because there's there's a halacha to do it, so therefore I do it. It's like serious stuff. You have to understand the power of these karbanis in your hand. So at that point in time, Avraham, the Gemara seems to say that his concerns were quelled. He was no longer so concerned about it anymore because at least he knew there was a way to do it. But even still, take a look at history. History did not pan out the way he would have hoped. We have been exiled, and we have gone through pogroms, and we've gone through crusades, and the Holocaust, was beyond imagination, beyond comprehension, and so he was concerned, But here we are, Baruch Hashem, thousands of years later, back in the land, miraculously, amazingly. I mean, it's an amazing thing where Hashem still brought us back. And really, that's the answer to the question. They will have a rough road, but they'll keep it. It'll be theirs forever. That's the promise. No matter what they do. It's kind of like what the Gemara talks about as well in Sanhedrin, which we've mentioned several times before in the past, but there's a little different context where Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar are having machlokas, seemingly. And the machlokas, well, in the end, it's not, but it looks like it. They're talking about the case, talking about the Gula Shlema. And Rabbi Eliezer makes a statement and says, if the Jewish people do tshuva and maisim tovim, then the Gula will come. If they don't, it's not going to happen. That's 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 an important component, and the Gra brings this down as well. The Ramchal, the different psukim, how once there's a pekida, once Hashem starts to show signs of Gula, we have to put our input of davening for these things and calling it to a Kodesh Baruch Hu that we really want the Gula, not like pay lip service to the tefillas, but you got to ask for redemption. It's got to be real to you. It's got to be everything come down to that. You can't just like, well, okay, in the meantime, exile is so pleasant, so who needs it? No, no, you have to. Otherwise, it'll go south, and it'll get worse as it has done because we didn't follow up on what's happened on our behalf. In the meantime, it's a gula. Anyhow, so the tefillah or the daven. Okay, I forgot the main point. Back to the original idea. Going back to Mora. That just in terms of the power of tefillah itself, in terms of bringing the gula, but still, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, with all this is what's going to happen, right? Even though the Gemara seems to resolve it, it's not resolved because of this. Because the Pasuk says that no matter what, this is how it's going to play out. You ask the question, but ma'ida, and the answer is bris ben besarim. And what is bris ben besarim? It's basically saying to Avraham Avinu that the answer to your question is going down to Mitzrayim and suffering. Well, it doesn't say Mitzrayim, but wherever we're going to go to, we know it's Mitzrayim. Hashem knows it's Mitzrayim, right? And there's reasons why it's Mitzrayim, but without even naming the nation, wherever we go to, this is what's going to happen. And it doesn't really matter who, because it's more to do with the what. And it just, everyone wants to know what he did wrong. What did he say? Why is that the response? Because it doesn't seem like Hashem is angry. It doesn't seem like Hashem is saying, oh, you're asking that question? Here, take this. And even if he said, take this, it should happen to him, to Abraham. We didn't ask the question. He asked the question. Let him go through what he has to go through in the end. We're just born to him, and we're the descendants. And so why should we be guaranteed to suffer like this? Because he asked this question. And the Meforshim on a Pshat level, they look for different answers. They provide different answers. All of them seem to be lacking somewhat. But the reality is, and the Leshem explains, that Hashem, he wasn't angry because the question was asked. He wasn't, punishing Abraham or his descendants because the question was asked, or because of what's going to happen in the future. That's not what's going on over here. Rather, Abraham asked the question, and Hashem said, let me tell you how history is going to unfold. Let me tell you how this is going to play out. Your children, right? You'll give birth to Yitzchak, you'll give birth to Yaakov, they'll come to Shvatim, that'll turn into a nation. The nation will go down to Egypt, for whatever means takes place. And then when they're down there, they'll do Mitzyanim at first, they'll do very well, as the Haggadah says, but eventually it's going to be rough. 116 years of slavery, and they're going to go out, as the Torah says, Baruch Gadol. But they'll go out, and then they'll inherit the land. But really, the truth is, if we continue on with the story, it's really Bechukosai. It's really Bechukosai and Parshas Kisavo. That's not the end of it, by the way. It doesn't say that in Bris Ben Besarim. Right? The same way Moshe says to Kosh Baruch Hu, right? Whom shall I say is calling? Ekya she'ekya. And Rashi explains, the Gemara explains, Hashem is saying that just like I'm with you in this exile, I'll be with you in the future exiles. So Moshe says, they haven't finished this one yet. Why are we bringing up future exile? Who wants to hear, yeah, you'll go out now, but don't worry, you'll go back into another exile later on. Just leave us here. So Hashem says, you're right, okay. So we'll just talk about this one for now, and we'll deal with the other one later, even though they're all alluded to in the Chumash from the second pasuk in Ma'aseh Bereshis is talking about the four exiles of the Jewish people who don't even exist yet. Right? But that's how built in it is in the end. So really, Parashat Bechukosai is the hemshech of Lech Lecha and Bris Ben Besarim. It's the continuation. It's like not only that, but this is what's going to happen in the future. It's just that it's not worded that way, right? In Lech Lecha, it's literally looks like an answer, and we just have to understand why it's the answer and how it's the answer. But in Bechukosai, it seems optional because it says, "Be'im chukosai tilechu." That's mitzvosai tishmeru. If you will do this, you'll get the bracha. But if they're discussing to you, you won't do them. So this is what's an. So it seems like the choice is ours. But is it really? Well, I mean, we have bechira, and you have to make choice. Becharta b'chaim. Do the best you can. Whatever you want to say and however you want to argue the point. Yes, bechira, no bechira. Every day you see you have choices. You might be manipulated. You might, the situation might be overwhelming. You might find yourself in predicaments you did not create, knowingly at least, that are forcing you to do a certain thing. How many times you get caught off guard and you get angry? And later on, you might kick yourself and say, "I wish I could get angry," but it's almost impossible. It's the same way if someone scares you, your heart's going to jump, whether you like it or not, because that's the way we're built. So, a person can decide to be as calm as possible, and all of a sudden they see something, they hear something, terrorist attack, something happens, or you hear a politician, or you hear the news, or you hear our enemies, and just all of a sudden your blood boils. It's amazing how, I try not to listen to the news. I try not to watch the news. So I have very peaceful days until someone tells me something on the news, and boom, all of a sudden just like, and it's like, not like, oh, I'm not going to listen to that anymore. No, I don't want to hear that. Right? It's like you hear it and it just slaps you in just like that before you realize what's actually going on. We're emotional and we have to work on our midas and we have to change ourselves and make ourselves more godly. But until you do, that's life. But at some point in that, all of that, you have some kind of choice. Not always the choice you think you have, but your choice. And then leave it at that. That's the bottom line. So, the Torah is telling you can choose brucha or klala, and that's fine, and you will hopefully choose the brucha over the klala, but it does not guarantee you get the brucha. Clearly, even the Gemara says Moshe said to Kodesh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai, please, while we're at this, can you answer a very difficult philosophical question that everyone's going to have anyhow until the end of history? Why did bad things happen to good people? Why did good things happen to bad people? And why we're at it, well, so why did good things happen to good people? And why did bad things happen to bad people? And Moshe asked all four possibilities. But the main question, as we learned from Eov, is why did bad things happen to good people? So there's an answer over here, there's an answer over there. We know these things, they have answers. But at the end of the day, and the bottom line to all of this, right? What's really going on here? Is Hashem saying you can avoid the curses? Theoretically, you could go through history and not have these curses over thousands of years, and exile, and going amongst the nations of the world, and being affected by them, and being thousands of years from Har Sinai, and having no prophets for over 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and just hanging on by the skin of our teeth, the Jewish people, only because the miracles were still here, and you can still avoid those klalos, those curses. Well, apparently not. But looking at the Holocaust, the generation of the Holocaust, clearly, nobody did anything that bad in that generation to warrant that type of response. So you can argue that, right, it's true. But for example, if you don't protect your roof, you let your roof get weak, and there's a few tiles that are missing up there, and shingles, and you don't make sure it's waterproof, and you hold it, and it finally rains, and the water builds up, then it can cause a much bigger hole than just the part that you left unprotected, because that's the way materials work. It gets very heavy, breaks everything, and this breaks. And look at the Twin Towers. Not everything failed, but enough things failed. And once those things failed, the whole thing came down. And that's very much how life works. Kamsa bar kamsa. The small thing, the son of a small thing. Small things lead to big things. You have to take care of the small things to avoid the big things in the end. You can argue that point. You can say, no, it wasn't that they did that. But once they already let the Satan in, the klipos, the evil, to do its thing, well, as Rashi points out in Parashat Ve'era, right? Once the Malach HaMavet gets reshus to go out, tzaddikim, Rishonim, everybody's fair game at that point in time. So we were told to stay home. There are such rules like that. There's also it's cumulative, right? It wasn't that generation did enough bad, but over the course of several generations, of the same amount of bad, less bad, but it adds up, as we see in this week's Parsha too, as Rashi points out. Eventually, we were exiled for 70 years because of all the Shemitah cycles that added up that we didn't keep. So there is this accumulative factor when it comes to punishment as well. So that could be explaining it as well. But even still, the cheshbon is done. So yeah, it does paint the picture, and you have to treat it as if you have the choice to choose the brocha and avoid the bad. And there's lots of times it works out that way. For dozens of years, for decades, we had a very good run of history. We had protection, we reduced anti-Semitism, financial success, acceptance amongst the nations, the Gentiles. And then, not today, it's all turning around once again. But it's possible. But that's not what's really going on over here. And that's what we learn really from Brisbane and Masari. Hashem was telling Avraham Avinu a sod, a yesod and a sod, a fundamental of history, Jewish history, world history, and a secret, a mystery, a Kabbalistic point. He was telling Avraham Avinu the reason why you will get the land and your children, your descendants will keep it forever is because since you have chosen to be my shaliach, you've chosen to be the one to be my partner in the shleimus of Maaseh Bereshis, you have taken on you and therefore your descendants who will be born from you, tikkun olam, the rectification of the world. Now, the rectification of the world, you hear those terms, you look around and you see corrupt politicians, businesses that are evil businesses, evil nations, like the things that are obvious to us that we try and fix up. But the reality is all of that is more of a symptom. It's like dealing with a cold by simply blowing your nose or rubbing your eyes. These are symptoms. They're not the real cause of the cold. The cause of those evil empires, the cause of all the corruption, the cause of whatever is going in the world, the insanity, the morality, all that what we're seeing, witnessing, it's not that. In fact, the Gemara even hints to this, because if you look at the Gemara in Chagiga, and Shabbos shows up the first time, it brings a pasuk down, and the Gemara says, who's this talking about? The Gemara says, because Torah was supposed to be given after 1,000 generations, but if you count them, from Adam Arishon until Moshe Rabbeinu, there's only 26. So it looks like the Torah was given 974 generations early. But anyhow, there could never have been 1,000 generations in history. History's only meant to last 6,000 years. And if every generation, anyhow, 25, 30 years, right, put that into 6,000, and maximum is 200? You can't have 1,000, that's for sure. So we can't be talking about 1,000 human generations. So what are we talking about? So the Gemara says, we're talking about generations of spiritual beings, 26 generations of human beings, but 974 generations of spiritual beings from before creation. Now, Gemara seems to indicate that they were just cut short. Now, they didn't really exist. And then it says, but don't worry, they're going to come back in every generation since Maaseh Bereshis, and they'll be the most azus panim in every generation, the most chutzpahdik people, the Erev Rav, you name it, the people who just drive you nuts, really in the worst way possible. That's who these souls are from. But the amazing thing is that these souls come from before creation. Our souls come from since creation. The generations that were already created after Maaseh Bereshit, but those souls come from before creation, which goes to show you a very important point. And this is what Hashem's telling Avraham. This is the Yesod. That what's happening since creation, since Maaseh Bereshit, is really a function and the response to what happened prior to Maaseh Bereshit. I mean, what is that? I mean, who learns about that? You go to Cheder, there's no classes on pre-Maaseh Bereshis. We start with Maaseh Bereshis. You go to Yeshiva Gedola, right? No one talks about pre-Maaseh Bereshis. You're only going to get that if you go to Yeshivas Mekubali. You learn Zohar, you learn Kabbalah. In that world, it's one of the most obvious things in the world. It's talked about, explained, the result, it's known. It's so known that you have to wonder how it didn't spill over into the world of Pshat, of everyday life, everyday Torah. And yet the Gemara tells us in the Gemara itself that pre-creation is the cause of what's going on post-creation. The same way, for example, that your genetics, I mean, like you may be, the first thing they ask you when you go to a doctor or a hospital, God forbid, for some illness, unusual illness, they're going to get your family history because you may not have thought about this. Maybe you met your grandparents, maybe you didn't. More than likely, you did not meet your great grandparents, and certainly your great great grandparents. Yet, what happened to them, where they lived, where they went through, where they came from, is being mashpia on you to this very day. And you don't notice it, you don't think about it as long as your life can exist happily in the present. But the moment it can no longer exist happily in the present, you start looking to the past. You can't look in the future. Right? You start looking to the past to see what might be there as a clue to what's going on in the present. That's what the Gemara is telling you. That's what you have to pay attention to. And that's what Avram was telling Kosh Baruch, or Kosh Baruch was telling Avram Avinu, that they're going down to Mitzrayim. It's not going to be punishment. It's not Mama Ida, you asked this question, now I'm going to let you have it for not trusting and waiting to see. No, your concerns are real, and I appreciate them, and they're important. And here are the answers to those questions. But the real answer to the question is, there's something going on in history much, much bigger. And your descendants are going to have the opportunity to be my partners to make it all right. Not that I made a mistake. This is the way I want it to be. This is the way it has to unfold. It's all part of a master plan. I know the future, so I know how it all plays out. I'm perfect and get all right. This is what I want it to be, right? But I'm looking for some human, component to work together with me to make this tikkun take place, and that's going to be your merit. Because in order to be able to be able to have that land forever, which is holy and special, right? Then you're going to have to go through all of this, and that's really reflects back on this week's Parsha too. Even though it's worded in such a way that you choose good, you get the blessings. You choose bad, you get the curses, and that's true. You can't get out of that. That's a reality on a personal basis. That's how you earn your schar in the world to come, by choosing the right thing. Kol b'dei shemayim chutz miyushamayim means that your job is to have your shemayim. Your job is to choose to do what God expects you to do to the best of your ability, and then He'll take it from there. He'll judge you based upon that. The results depend upon history. That's what Hashem tells Eov. Were you there when I founded the earth? Were you there when I drew up the master plan to make all of history? It just happens to be you're being touched by something much bigger than your own personal life until this time. It's not just because I talked to the sun on a bed. That's just a device, a literal device to get the story out. But the real reality, Hashem says, is that no, this is about something much bigger. And be happy that you're a part of it. I know it hurts. 100%. There's no question about it. It's painful. So in this week's Parsha, on one hand, again, I don't want to get the wrong idea that we have no control over any of this and that our free will makes no difference. It does make a difference. But the real thing going on over here is a real thing that was going with Avram. Because Baruch Hu said, oh, since you asked the question, it's like someone says, what's on the menu? What are we having for supper tonight? If you didn't ask the question, you just show up at the table, sit down, and find out for yourself. But if you're asking in advance, what are we going to have? Or what's the program for dinner? What's today's program? Oh, since you asked the question, let me tell you how it's all going to happen. And they tell you all the details as much as possible. It's the same thing. But you asked the question, how does this work? Let me tell you. And it works like this. I'm not punishing anybody. I'm just explaining to you that, what's going to happen in history, because you are now officially the root of the Jewish people, as will be your descendants until you officially become the nation itself, and the rest is history that we've been living out. This week's Parsha too, because Baruch Hu is saying, let me tell you, Jewish people, right? There's going to be bracha, there's going to be klala, no matter what you do. No matter what you do. Here's the program. This week's Parsha is telling you, here is the program for Jewish history. we know it didn't lie. That's for sure. Despite the prophets, despite the opportunities, despite the knowledge, despite all these, it still played out. Rashi shows us how everything the Torah predicted came true in a generation. Somebody was doing it somewhere. This thing happened here. This thing happened over there. So, like someone warns you, the doctor says, don't eat that, you get sick. You don't eat it. Don't smoke, you might die. Hopefully, you can beat that nicotine, thing and get around it. But you want to, you certainly want, I'll ignore that and just go do it and see if I die. Right? Same thing, Torah tells you. But despite our best efforts, despite what the prophets like literally pulling their hair out, trying to get people to wake up and to hear the message and do what had to be done to avoid the crisis, happened anyhow. I mean, a perfect case in point is Chizkiah. Chizkiah has a prophecy. He's going to give birth to a son, Menashe. And Menashe is going to turn the country back to idol worship for 22 years. He'll spend the next 30 years after that, doing tshuva and fixing up the mess he made. But for the first, that's all Chizkiah sees. Maybe he sees a whole thing, but certainly he doesn't go, oh, just 22 years. No, 22 years is bad enough. So therefore he says, I'm not going to get married. Even though I have a mitzvah to do so, if I don't get married, I don't have children. So this way I can avoid Menashe. And Yeshaya says to him, that's not your call. You have a mitzvah to get married. You do the best you can to raise your child. And you can't be expected to do more than that. And yet, even though he tried to get around it, did everything, because you never know what Hashem, there's lots of times where it looks like it should be this way, it goes this way instead, and you do win. But that's what Hashem expected to do in the first place. But he had to make it look like you're going to lose, so you do the right thing. Like, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, they walked into a fiery furnace being told by Daniel, no miracle is going to happen for you. A miracle did happen for them. They were saved. But they had to go in believing that no miracle was going to happen, so they could do the Kiddush Hashem they had to do to warrant the miracle happening. But had they gone in like Haran, expecting the miracle, they would have died. Because that's not the way it works. So sometimes it can look like disaster is going to result, but that's what you had to believe to do the right thing, that it doesn't happen to you. Not the outsmarter of Kodesh Baruch Hu, but because that's how things had to play out. But a lot of times it's not like that. A lot of times, in fact, it may look like it's not going to become that bad. And yet, how did it get to this point? Yeah, but that's what Hashem says. History, Jewish history, is not going to be easy. There'll be good times, blessed times when you'll say, oh, it's almost like Parnassa works this way a lot of times. I don't know, it depends on who you are and what your situation is. But sometimes, a person, the Gemara says it's a wheel. It's a wheel that goes around, like the wheel of fortune. It touches everybody. There's times when people are up. There's times when people are down. That's why we have expressions in the Western world. Be nice to the people you see on the way up, because they're the same people you see on the way down. Why do we have expressions like that? Because that happens to a lot of people in life. You get back up again, but it's like, up and down, difficult times, because tikkun is much bigger than we know. The amazing thing is, I guess it's not really an amazing thing, it's just a thing about life, is how blindsided we are, how we just don't get it. We live in the world like it's Gan Eden, and we expect it to be that way. Obviously, there's things that go wrong. We can't perfect everything, and we know that. But for the most time, we try and get away with an ideal life, and we expect it. We hope it's going to happen. And when it doesn't, we get upset because it ruins our day, it ruins our life, it ruins our situation. But people go about their daily life as if everything really should be like Gan Eden on some level for them. But that's not the world. That's not the way the world was built, and that's not the way the world functions. There are people who understand that. I'm not talking about paranoid people, insecure people who constantly worry about things going wrong. So even the good things they can't enjoy because they're so worried it's not going to last. And Orion horror, things like that. No, I'm talking about people who they know how to enjoy the good. They're comfortable with the good, but they also understand if they have the good, That's the exception to the rule. So that sounds depressing. Anyone listening would go, well, are you telling me that life is meant to be a nightmare? And the dream part, the good stuff is just an exception and a lucky day. It's muzzle. I was just talking to a businessman today who runs a program. He actually teaches, students about how to start up businesses and things like that, and they bring in guest speakers, successful business, startups and all that. And he told me, because we were talking about this very, very point, and he said invariably, when asked by the students, what you attribute your success to, everybody says luck. They put work in, they worked hard, they tried to do this, they tried to do that, but they didn't focus. They say luck. Gemara says mazel, right? Mazel is not luck, even though we say mazel tov as if we're saying good luck. Luck is more of a random type of thing. Mazel is your destiny. And that's why some people, no matter how hard they try, they cannot get rich. And some people, no matter how hard they don't try, they still get rich or healthy or famous or whatever the case may be. Where it affects, there's a reality to this, even though it says a person can rise above their muzzle, but the Lashon explains you can never overcome your muzzle. You can mitigate it, but even that's complicated because you're not really mitigating it as much as you're going to a higher level of reality where that muzzle no longer is effective, is no longer important. You beat it only because of the fact that it no longer applies to you because you're no longer in that level anymore. You've changed. And that's part of the growth process, and that's part of the muzzle in the end too. Because Hashem knows the future. So it's not like you're surprising anybody in Shemai. Maybe the angels, but not Kadosh Baruch Hu. But this is the program. And clearly we see, right, Jewish history. I mean, in the 1800s, people didn't know where they're going to get food from. The Haskalah began, at least in Russia at that time, because of poverty, abject poverty. They had one pair of shoes for 7 boys in a family. So they took turns going to school because there was snow and it was freezing. You can't go in your bare feet. So one day, Shlomi went because he had the shoes, and the next day Yosef went because he had the shoes. And food, even in the 50s and 60s. I mean, people tell you stories what it was like, for them growing up and how they had to take bones to cook the bones. They didn't have any meat on the bones, but they took bones to be able to just to cook them, to have some type of protein in the liquid, some type of soup like that. Jewish history has had its periods of time, clearly. Ours really is more the exception. Going back to Shlomo's time, temple times, yeah, for sure there's great periods of time. But if you go to the Shoftim, right, the Shoftim, it's like literally, one story over and over and over again. The Jewish people have it good. They turn to Avodah Zorah. A nation comes and conquers them and oppresses them. And then they do tshuva. And then they beat the nation. And then they do it all over again, over it. It's like a cycle over the entire Sefer Shoftim. And then the Malachim. And there's splitting, and it looks like a mess. And it can be depressing. But the reality is, it's a track. It's what history has to go through, what we have to go through. Individually, in our own slice of reality, we have to do the best we can to do the mitzvahs with as much kavana, as much intention, as well as possible, as many of them as possible, because that's how you get your schar in the world to come. Serious nefesh, that's the currency of the world to come. But in terms of affecting history and the bigger picture, it's a schus. And there's lots of times you will be chosen by Hashem to do that. But the overall big picture, it's on a much higher level. And that's why it says, not b'mitzvosai telechu, but b'chukusai telechu. Chukusai is the word chok. Chok is the concept of a mitzvah that if Hashem didn't give it to us, we'd never figure it out. Don't murder, don't steal, right? Don't all these don'ts that we have, even in Western society, because we know that for society, they're utilitarian. These are mitzvahs you need to be able to function in a society and prosper and in mutual trust and success. But don't cook milk and meat together. Don't wear wool and linen woven together. Paraduma, mitzvahs like that. Once we have them, then maybe we can go ahead and explain some things, but if Hashem hadn't given to us, wouldn't understand them. And yet, they're on a higher level than the everyday mitzvahs we do understand, because they belong to higher realities, the messianic period of time. And that's what we can't relate to, can't understand, because we're down here and they're up there. And it says, telechu. Nonetheless, they're difficult, you can't understand them, but you walk in them. They are the basis of your life. You remain loyal to that and to me as a result of that. That's your job, right? That will lead you to a tremendous sense of accomplishment. That will lead you to schuyot. That will lead you maybe even to better time. Who knows what it will lead to? There's no guarantees. Clearly, we see that in our own personal lives. But that's what we have to do. We have to understand that, yeah, we have a choice and we make choices. But B'chukosai, Parsha Kisavo, that's the program. And hopefully, we'll live in a period of time we don't have to fulfill things like that. But as history starts to go this way again, increased anti-Semitism, 800% more, at least, anti-Semitism. And nations now turning against Israel, fighting for its survival, fighting for its protection, doing nothing but trying to prosper and bring prosperity to its neighbors. And the world condemns us. In B'chukosai telechu. It doesn't make sense to us because it's part of a larger plan. Stick with it, be loyal to it, and you will never go wrong. Besides Tavis, we should be able to see history end already. B'ezras Hashem, without having to go through any more of that. We've gone through all of that, and hopefully that's enough. Hopefully the Holocaust was the last big thing we ever had to go through. Hopefully the Mashiach will come now, B'ezras Hashem, at this stage. But we have to daven for it. You have to ask Hashem for it. Don't get complacent. Say, I want the Gula now. It has to be real to you. And God willing, we'll see an end to the tyranny of evil and insanity, and that Mashiach will come as Hashem, and we can finally live as Tzavakosh Baruch Hu the way that we're meant to. Shabbat Shalom.